Thanks for joining me on the Happier Marriage Secrets podcast, where we are on a mission to make marriages happier again. Today, we have our guest, Elizabeth Polinsky. Elizabeth, I'm so glad you have joined me on this podcast today. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks. I'm doing really good and I'm excited to be here. I love being on podcasts and I love talking about how to make marriages happier. So this is going to be fun.
Awesome. I know it's going to be fun. I've listened to a few of your interviews and I've really heard different directions you've gone in, being asked as a guest. So it really has helped me as well as just kind of preparing for this. But I just like to have conversation and make it very organic to our time today. So one of the ways that we are going to accomplish our mission, Elizabeth, is to have guests like you who share your story and our expertise that helps our audience acquire skills and or learn from what you shared so that they can have happier marriages. But before we talk about that, where you are today and what you're doing, what was a story you had about marriage as you grew up, and where did that story come from?
Yeah, I think the story I had was that marriages don't work. If I had to put it succinctly, I did not see until I was in high school. I did not see a couple that stayed together that was happy. Most
Wow.
of the relationships I had seen were families where the parents had divorced, or they were in families where there was so much conflict and tension between the couple that you almost wished they would just divorce. And that was pretty much everything I saw growing up until I was in high school. And that is the first like truly healthy, happy relationship that I've ever seen. And they're still like my role model today.
Wow.
They are the couple that I want to be.
What
So
what was it about that marriage that really kind of stood out to you from I mean, other than the stability and probably the long term, what else that stood out to you that make that marriage such had such an impact on you?
yeah, that's a really great question. I don't know that I have analyzed it that in depth like that, but I
Yeah.
just kind of going with my gut.
Mm.
I think they were the first couple that seemed really kind to each other.
Oh.
And
Mm.
they had like tense moments of sort of like conflict or disagreements, but they were relatively mild and would talk through them. And I knew
Mm.
that they worked through things together. And I knew that they would read different sort of like relationship books and that they
Mm.
were actively working on making sure that they had a good marriage, which is also something I had never seen anybody do before.
Well, so in your own household, your own family of origin,
hmm
how was that?
Yeah, my parents divorced when I was pretty young. I want to say I was like 2 or 3. They were a dual military couple, and military life definitely played a role in the decline of their relationship, which is so common. Like as you know, I work with a ton of military couples, so that was part of the passion that led me to working with military couples. Um, and and then I'm thinking like my dad remarried and he struggled still
Mhm.
with relationships and went through a few different divorces.
Mhm.
And military life, I know, played a big role in the second divorce as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I didn't really, and my mom, I lived primarily with my mom after that, and she didn't remarry until like all the kids were out of the house. So
Mm.
I didn't grow up really with a relationship in my family.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't have my mom didn't have siblings, so it wasn't like I was around cousins or
Mhm.
other extended family relationships. My dad had kind of like an estranged sister who
Mm.
I really liked, but because of that, I wasn't really around her very often. She had a really great marriage. I think they were probably good role models as well, but
Mhm.
I just wasn't hardly ever saw them. So,
Yeah, yeah. So I can imagine that as you then began to get into adulthood, and having had, like you said, that kind of story about marriage until you got into high school, and that was really kind of a game changer to see what marriage should look like and get to learn some things about that as you watch the couple and so on. So did that kind of change your thought about marriage to in such a way that you could possibly one day see yourself getting married?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because I think I grew up very in like a very religious environment. So the
Mhm.
goal was always marriage. That was
Mm.
always like the thing to eventually attain. But at the same time, I had this conflicting message that while you should get married and this is the ultimate thing that you should be doing, it won't ever work out.
Mm.
People will just be in conflict. And
Mm. Mm.
so they were kind of conflicting messages that way.
Mhm. Mm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, so it wasn't that I didn't ever see myself
Right.
being married. It was more that I didn't know how to choose a partner or how
Mhm.
to think about what would be good qualities in a partner or what would make for a healthy relationship.
Mhm.
Those were more things that I personally struggled with more.
And so you haven't seen the impact of military life on marriages and how that worked out and so on. And then you eventually got married to someone who was also in the military. Was it what did he was he in
Hmm.
the military at the time, or was that after the marriage?
He was in the military when we met. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
So let's see. So then I became a therapist and I worked as a trauma therapist for the Department of Veterans Affairs for a while. So I was working with a lot of veterans and even some of them who had gone through like really horrific things would tell me, I remember some of them telling me that the thing that really stuck with them was that their relationship declined, like that the
Mhm.
like all kind of all everything that happened with their marriage that led to the divorce. And that was one of the things that they were having such a hard time kind of like moving past in their
Mhm.
life. So this was like another way that I was like, oh, I really want to help military couples. And then I met my now husband when I was working as a trauma therapist.
Oh,
And
okay.
when I decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to commit to this guy, like we had to move around with the
Yeah.
military. So,
Mhm.
so it was once we started moving around, I left the job at the VA that I decided to go really hardcore into couples
Mhm.
counseling.
Yeah. So
So,
you kind of with a background on the training that you had, did you see that possibly as one of the reasons why you could say, well, I would have an idea about what you might need to do in your own relationship, should in case you experience conflict or having any challenges? Did any of that help you, or it was on maybe on hand, just learning as you go? I mean, what was that like for you?
yeah, that's a great question. I think I totally failed at my early dating relationships. But that was a motivator because I started reading all the relationship books that I could to try to figure
Mhm.
out like why are my dating relationships going so horrible? And I knew part of it was I just didn't have a template for what
Mhm.
how to pick a partner, what would be a healthy relationship. The people who were around me were not in healthy relationships, so they couldn't really give me advice. Um, but I read a bunch of books, um, and I think back then when I was first reading books like that, they were really just to help me. But
Mm.
then when I was in school to become a therapist, I started learning a little bit about couples counseling. But then when I worked in the government, most government jobs for therapists are very focused on individual mental health counseling. So
Mhm.
they're just not focused on couple relationships.
Mhm.
But I did some work with the chaplains at the VA, and the chaplains, um, were very relationship based. They were
Right.
interested in helping veterans with their relationships. So I got to collaborate some. I
Mm.
did these warrior to soulmate workshop with the VA.
Mm,
chaplain program.
mm,
And then when I when I really decided, yes, I want to pursue this dream, I
mhm,
then started a PhD in couples therapy.
mm.
So that's really where I learned. I mean, that's like really where I learned
Yeah.
how to help couples was through that process.
Yeah. Do you find that because you're so much in the military and having worked in that context so often, and so there tend to be, which is most people think about, post-traumatic stress disorders and stuff in military couples, but I've had most people who are not in the military. What are the connections? What are some things that are similar on the way that is showing up in relationship that you see so often in
Hmm.
military couples?
Yeah, there's so many similarities. Every problem that a regular couple has, millennials have them too. You know, the stress of transitioning to being first time parents.
Mhm.
That's a really common point. Um, sort of um, navigating how to go from an individual person
Mm,
to being a unit is
mm,
almost always a big struggle for people in the first few years of marriage. Just
mhm,
how do I navigate how much individuality we both have and how much togetherness we both have.
mhm.
And every couple has to sort of create some sort of balance that they're both
Yeah.
comfortable with in terms of that. So that's a really common um,
Mhm.
challenge. Um, le- I mean, learning how to communicate effectively is
Yeah.
another really common challenge,
Mhm.
especially at the beginning, um, and sort of creating a new family norm,
Yeah.
like creating a whole new family,
Yeah.
and with
It
new
really is.
traditions and
Yeah, and I find sometimes when they're trying to merge that whole to, what's your own background, your own connect, your own issues you've had growing up. I find a couple sometimes, and a lot of people, even in my audience who are listening today, find themselves stuck. They're stuck because of a connection issue, or they may see a behavior or some other thing that it's like this foreign thing. They have no idea what to do with it, right? And
Mhm.
behaviors that tend to come up over and over again and they feel stuck. So, from a broad perspective, like a 30,000 feet view first, when you're looking down on a relationship like that where a person might be stuck, where did your mind go first as far as what what approach to even begin to unpack with them the possibilities that there might be something traumatic or something of a nature that they're bringing into this
Mhm.
relationship more than just what's happening at that time? How do you start to unpack with them those things?
Yeah, what a great question. I think um, I work from emotionally focused couples therapy, which is based on attachment theory.
Mhm.
And so oftentimes with couples, I'll explain kind of like just the basics of attachment theory. But we all come to our current relationships with sort of a template for
Mhm.
what we expect in terms of how other people will treat us, um, and sort of our own worth and our self esteem that we learned from our family growing up or
Mhm.
from previous relationships. So, like sometimes I'll have clients where they were in really abusive first relationships. And that, even if they had the most perfect childhood experience, that can really create a new template on the inside of them where then they expect a harm from the
Mhm.
new partner, even if and so we have to work on that template. But
Mhm.
so couples come into relationships with template and um, I think ways that they sort of expect the world to be. And
Mhm.
then those are often very different, different templates that
Surprise.
they have learned from their different families.
Mhm.
Um, and depending on how much um, pain someone experienced in previous relationships, might also determine how many things they find emotionally triggering
Mm.
in the new relationship. So if I had I'm thinking of one of my best friends from college who is Italian, and she comes from this big Italian family, and very like identifies, we are Italian, you know, and they yell and they scream, and this is just regular dinner. If she were to marry someone who came from a a different cultural background,
Mhm.
or just a different family who wasn't so expressive that
Yeah.
way, the silence would be triggering. It would be like, why are you not engaging with me? And
Mm.
for the other person who comes from kind of just like a more quiet, I
Mhm.
guess, family, you know, not the Italian
Right.
sort of thing, they might experience the level of expressiveness as
Mhm.
triggering, as like, what do
Mhm.
I do with this?
Mhm.
Because their templates for what is normal in relationships
Mhm.
are so different.
Mhm.
And and then the and then when you don't understand, maybe understand is not quite the right word, but when it seems so foreign, I guess it
Yeah.
seems so different than
Right.
how their natural way of being is, then it's so easy to create judgments that aren't
Mhm.
necessarily true.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so sometimes hear things like, um, I'll hear things like, they're being abusive,
Mhm.
they're a narcissist, they're
Mm.
gaslighting me.
Mhm.
I want to be very clear, because if those things were really happening, those
Right.
would never be appropriate
Right.
under any circumstances.
Right.
And there are times where some of it is a misunderstanding between
Right.
couples.
Right. 'Cause I think what happened, like you're describing, I find these individuals may create their own meanings and
Hmm.
associate and give it and label those things a certain way. And sometimes those labels, it's also what creates additional conflict in the relationship because
Yes.
now the person may be saying, telling that person, you just don't care, you don't love me, and what's going on, and all these things are happening. And so you mentioned about the idea of this attachment. So
Hmm.
what are then the attachment styles, or what are the things that people may begin to think about when they hear this word attachment?
Yes. Yeah. So we all form attachments to a variety of people.
Mhm.
And when we're first born, you know, that tends to be our parent, whoever's raising us, but it could also be a sibling. Some people form really deep attachments to like a sports coach
Mhm.
or a best friend, that
Mhm.
the same best friend for 20 years, that could be an attachment as well. And then when you have a marriage or a sexual partner, a committed relationship, that is all becomes an attachment
Mhm.
um, relationship over time as well.
Mhm.
So ideally, um, everyone craves sort of this sense of feeling secure in
Mhm.
those relationships. And that would be ideal. And there are a few elements that help us know that a relationship is secure. One is that it's like a place I go home to.
Mhm.
It's my emotional home, that in the stresses of life, I can go to my person and get comfort and
Mhm.
emotional support from them. It also is a way that it's also my home base. So it's not just my home that I can return to, it's
Mhm.
my home base that I can then explore and go do fun, cool things like be on a podcast, and then go back and tell
Mhm.
my partner or my
Mhm.
mom how cool it was to be on a podcast. And so these sorts of things um, are two of the primary parts of feeling secure. And there is an acronym that I really like to use called RE, which is accessible, responsive, and engaged. So
Okay.
I can access my person. I know they're going to respond to me versus ignore me, and they're going to be engaged in like the conversation or with me. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so many people don't have this for a
Mhm.
variety of reasons. Sometimes it is because they didn't have security in their relationships growing up.
Mhm.
And then that becomes the new template, sort of an insecure template for future relationships.
Mhm.
Um, and you'll hear people talk about anxious attachment styles, avoidant
Uh-huh.
attachment styles.
Mhm.
Those are just different ways that people coped um, with that feeling of insecurity.
Mm. So if they're anxious attachment, right, or even the avoidant, what would that person be doing? Because I think sometimes if you're in that moment, you hear and you feel insecure, right, and there's an attachment you're trying to make this attachment happen or work, and it's not. And
Hmm.
sometimes there's an avoidant kind of aspect of that. What would it normally look like in a couple's in a relationship?
Yes. So oftentimes, these two styles are attracted to each other, and they often end up in couple relationships together, where one does have an anxious attachment style from childhood, and the other one has an avoidant attachment style from childhood. Um, in moments of distress, when I don't uh, know if I can count on you to be my home, can I count on you to be ARE, right? Accessible, engaged, and responsive. If I feel like you're not there for me, how do I respond?
Mm.
So the anxious attachment person copes and responds by trying to get more engagement from their partner.
Mhm.
And so this might be trying harder to get your attention
Mhm.
or talking louder to try to be heard and to try to finally get through to you.
Mhm.
Um, Things like that.
Mhm.
Whereas someone with an avoidant coping style, would be trying to let me see how to put it succinctly. They would be trying to avoid conflict. It's
Mhm.
sort of like conflict between us signals danger.
Mhm.
It means I'm going to lose contact with you. I'm going to lose that home feeling with you. That I won't be able to count on you to be there for me if we start having all of this tension and conflict. So I'm going to be more quiet, or I'm going to walk away from the conversation, or I'm going to do something so that way we can let this tense moment pass us by and then get reconnected after it passes us by.
Mm.
So they both have good intentions
Yeah.
of preserving the relationship, but their styles are very different and often create friction between them.
No, I can see that. I can see where that is like I heard when you were just explaining that, which I think I truly appreciate that. Because both of them are trying to connect. They're trying to do something to preserve. They're trying to do something on behalf of the relationship. They're trying
Hmm.
to get that part working, but something that is they feel as if because the other person does not reciprocate the way they're hoping they would, then they're going to try harder, which now creates another element of conflict or problems in the relationship. So are those mostly more dominant or more often kind of styles that tend to be, or are there other things that a couple might want to even think about when they're in this relationship in their relationships?
Yeah, well, I would say like every couple has a pattern that they get um kind of like I don't know, like in a habit or a rut together
Mhm.
that they form. And the most common one often involves someone who is more anxiously attached and someone
Mhm.
who's more avoidantly attached.
Mhm.
But even people with more higher levels of security can
Mhm.
get into a pattern as well.
Okay.
But the most common pattern is that to um, I try to get through to you to get
Yeah.
more connection,
Mhm.
and um, and for some people that can feel very critical,
Mhm.
um, especially at higher levels. Like I'm trying harder and harder and harder to get
Yeah.
through to you.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other person is is feeling sort of pressure or um, gets defensive, something that seems critical, and they back away.
Mhm.
And then when the one backs away, the other one is saying, "Oh gosh, now I have to try harder to get to you. And then they
Yeah,
try harder and the other
yeah.
one backs away more. And then they get stuck in this sort of
Mhm,
loop.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
but the I think so I think to answer your question,
Yeah,
like every couple gets stuck in a pattern.
yeah,
It's normal. Um, and it's not that either of them are doing, are like bad people or doing
right.
something wrong or are to blame. It's that this sort of pattern is driving more and more distance between them.
Do you find, and again, I'm sure because of working with military couples, you probably see this more often than even civilians per se. But I sometimes come across where there's some trauma of one or both of the persons in that marriage, in the relationship. And so sometimes there are things that are happening, and I just call it the emotional allergic reaction that person may be having in because something is triggering them that is more traumatic in nature, but the other person may not
Hmm.
be aware of that. And so that creates for them an issue. When that is happening, and even in the military setting, what's the approach that normally helps a couple navigate those moments? And of course, a third party, a professional is very important here, but it's in general that could help them to navigate those moments to realize that this might be something of my past that's triggering me, and I need to let my partner know. What might be a way to them to begin to unpack that?
Yeah. Yeah. These are such lovely questions. I'm thinking like there are so many ways we could talk about this.
Yeah.
I'm finding myself thinking about a couple where one has PTSD and
Mm,
where one doesn't. And that might, like, if there is a diagnosis of PTSD, that adds a little bit of extra complexity where I
yeah,
would want that couple to have some like education around what
yeah.
what is PTSD and how does that what are the symptoms, so that way they can know that even if their partner is like snapping in that moment and they don't know why, they can know this is part of the PTSD, and having that kind of knowledge helps.
Mhm.
But for both bulls, I think the place that I like to start, at least after they have an idea of whatever pattern that they're in, um, is I like to use this acronym called TEMP, which stands for trigger, emotion, meaning, and protection. And it's just a way of tracking my internal emotional experience
Mhm.
to then, one, to build my own awareness of it. If I
Yeah.
can't tell my partner that I've been triggered unless I can become aware of it first. So
Yes.
going through TEMP individually can just help build that personal awareness into emotions, and it also makes emotions feel less intense. There's a regulating aspect to just being able to identify them. And
Mhm.
once each partner can start to do that process, then they can start coming back, after a tense moment and sharing with each other. This was my temp. This was what was going on with me.
Mhm.
And as they do that, they get faster at it, and then they can do it in the moment and they can be like,
Yeah.
whoa, 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 hold on. Let's figure out what's going on and go through temp together.
Hmm. I really like that. I think those are some good, tips and tools that someone can easily remember. But I think it's so critical for them to communicate often about these moments because they get stuck sometime and think that this is happening all over again. If I give a quick example of a couple I was working with at some time back, and there was there was a sexual trauma and the wife's part, and so what happened was after a while, because of their sexual interaction, she began to pull away, and he took it
Yeah.
personal, right? And she was having a hard time because she said, "I really love my husband, but I'm just having a hard time with this," and he doesn't seem to understand because she is reliving some things that is happening in their relationship, and it's almost like saying deja vu. Here's going to happen again, and so now she is like kind of pulling away, and he takes it personal, and is of course creating this relationship problem. So then it came in. That was where they wanted to start. So in moments like that, for example, a trauma like that, where that's
Hmm.
happening, how would you begin to even tell the couple maybe what they might want to do? And again, we're not doing therapy here. We're not trying to look for anything to
Yeah.
do. but in general, to even the self-awareness, how to begin to unpack this, because I find if they can only it's going to require both persons to truly
Yes.
step up to the plate in this area and to even have some results that could be helpful. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. This is complex. So
Yeah,
let me let
yeah,
me
yeah.
go through the different thoughts I'm having. So
Mhm,
one thought is to really normalize what trauma does to someone's nervous system. And really help both of them understand the impact of that past sexual trauma
mhm,
on someone's nervous system and
mhm,
how that absolutely would impact their sex life.
mhm.
It's very hard to feel sexy if
Yeah,
you are having memories of an
yeah,
assault happen.
yes.
um, so helping both like really understand what those symptoms are. PTSD is like one of the most curable mental
I
health
agree. I
diagnoses.
agree.
So the research is just so good, like on all of the trauma treatments, that
Yeah.
that does not have to be an experience that she continues to have.
Mhm,
She can go through trauma therapy
mhm,
and no longer have PTSD symptoms and be able to enjoy sex more again. Um, for this couple, though, it would be tempting to say she's the problem because of her sexual trauma.
yes.
But this guy in this story, he is also having some sort of it's maybe not, big trauma like a
Right.
sexual assault, but he is taking this really personally, which is
Yes.
about his own something is getting triggered from his past about I'm not good enough or I'm not wanted and my somehow my
Yes.
family I never felt wanted or sexually or something like this for him to take it so personally. So it would be helping both of them
Mhm,
um, uh, recognize how um, gosh, what am I thinking?
mhm.
I'm thinking about how they're both getting triggered, how
Yeah.
like feelings of insecurity or sensitivities and raw spots that they have emotionally are getting triggered in that dynamic.
Mm. I really appreciate what you said earlier. I think was the key word is having them to normalize some things. I find
Mhm.
sometimes, and if and of course we always mention to get some professional help, but sometimes I find that self talk, right? What can they say to themselves about this
Mm,
situation, this relationship, this partner they're with, because they're not, of course, a past situation that they experienced. And I find sometimes that self-talk in a way that helps to normalize that they feel safe, unless, of course, the other person is also being triggered and make them feel unsafe now. Then, of course, that becomes a different story. But in general, I think that might be helpful. Is
mhm.
self-talk helpful with someone who are having some just basic PTSD issues, or is not recommended?
Yes. Yeah. No, no. I mean, I think it is fine. I think um there's like I don't know, there are things that help like a small amount, a medium amount, and a lot.
Okay.
And I think that is something
Mhm.
that will help, but I think it sort of depends on how much their nervous system is being triggered. Because if I can do self-talk, like if it's triggered enough that self-talk will I'm sorry, if it's not so triggered that self-talk will help regulate them and help them be
Mhm.
more in touch with the present moment, then absolutely,
Mhm.
I'm all for that.
Mhm.
I just know sometimes, especially like right after a traumatic experience or when there hasn't been any treatment for it at all, then it can go like 0 to 100 on the inside so quickly that I don't know that they would be able to use self-talk, or even if they could,
Yeah.
it would be like not believed. And a
Yeah.
key piece to self-talk is that I
Yes.
have to be able to believe it
I agree.
when I
I
say it.
agree. Yeah. No, I appreciate that because I think while you were talking and beginning to unpack that, I'm starting thinking, okay, you're right. Because I think even sometimes the self-talk, if they, number one, don't believe it, it won't be helpful. But number two, I think that they may not even have the language with which to use
Yeah.
that would be very helpful for them because they're going to bring in the language that might even make matters worse, you know. So I think, yes, I think there's some elements of some care and a very discretion have to be used in that approach. You know, I really love the idea. So you've really mastered emotional focus therapy, right? EFT. Why did you choose that as the approach over others?
Yes. Yeah. Um, I'm thinking like three things. One, I fell in love. Like if you could fall in love with the type of therapy, I fell in love with the type of therapy.
Mhm.
Um, but also, um, the research is really strong in support of emotionally focused couple therapy. So the American Psychological Association, they keep track of kind of the evidence for all the different types of therapies and are they effective for different diagnoses like PTSD or depression or anxiety, and that's how we even know that PTSD is one of the most curable diagnoses. But right now, according to APA, there's only one evidence-based treatment for couple therapy that meets a certain research standard, and EFT is treatment. So
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that the other types of couple
Right.
therapy aren't helpful. They can be very helpful for couples, and couples have a lot of benefit from them. Um, there's just not as much research.
Mhm.
And part of that is I could go on like this whole
Yeah.
spiel about our mental health and how healthcare is around
Yeah.
mental health, but part of it is because relational therapies are not prioritized in
Yes.
comparison to individual therapies.
Which is so unfortunate because I believe, and my thing is that every problem a person experience is relational. I mean,
Yeah.
you peel it all the way back. There's some relational aspect to that, you know. So as we're kind of shifting before we're closing out here, I'm curious, as you are navigating this as a professional, but also as a wife and as a military, you move around quite a
Mhm.
bit. And
Yes.
how do you manage all of that? Because I'm thinking how some couples have a hard time moving two times, but you're moving around as the military, so to speak, requires. How do you navigate that and make sure your marriage gets priority in all of this?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think like I think there are some ways that I have some privilege that helps with that. So I'm thinking of several things. Like I grew up in a military family, so I have knowledge of like how things
Okay.
are. I'm kind of familiar,
Mm.
where that would be maybe harder if I had no context of military life. Um, I have also moved frequently with like going to grad school or different jobs and things like that. My family, because it's generations of military, they're just
Okay.
transient. um, and I also um, have like I have a high level of education, which and a career that's very mobile.
Yeah.
And I have the ability to have my own business, like my own private practice as a therapist that I mean, it does take creativity, but I also
Yes.
I'm still set up
Yeah.
um, in maybe ways that make it easier for me than for other military spouses. So I just want to like acknowledge that while also stating it does take a lot of creativity
Mhm.
and planning.
Mhm.
Um, like I'm thinking about not only this most recent move to Nevada. My husband was deployed and he came back and 2 weeks later we moved. And
Wow.
so almost the entire move was like on me until like
Oh,
actual driving.
man. Wow.
Um, and that's like really stressful.
Yeah.
But then also moving, not just our home, but my business and how to move like a business in
Mhm.
multiple states is also very interesting. So it just takes, I don't know, a lot of organization skills and
Yeah.
creativity and stubbornness. I don't know.
But I think like you also said, because you have grown up with this is pretty much a normal kind of way of just living, and you just adjust and just get acclimated as you keep on, moving around. But I think I love the idea that you recognize that you can work from anywhere you are, basically, if you virtually, and you can find a way to adapt your business to that. So I think it's really having the mindset to recognize, okay, it's maybe an opportunity for me to, just not only be at another place, but I can still continue as if everything remained the same, right? So, Elizabeth, I'm curious to see, as we're kind of winding down here, is there anything you're working on that even my audience might, even because I know that myself, I've truly just asking some questions just to be honest for myself as well. So I appreciate you answering some of those
Yeah,
questions.
of
It's
course.
very helpful. But I think they are getting some very helpful thing. I would love to know if there's anything you're working on, or how to even connect with you if they so desire, and what would they probably get if they do connect with you.
Yeah, happy to answer that. So I have two businesses. I have my counseling practice, Elizabeth Polinsky Counseling, where I'm licensed in 4 states right now, with like two more that are in the process. Um, so if people were looking for counseling or weekend, like I also do these weekend long intensive counseling sessions, for people who are out of state who want to like come in and do like a lot of hard work on the weekend. Those are um, options for counseling. And then I have my podcast, the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships. This My podcast is kind of up and going, but I have big goals for it in the future. I want to do more couples workshops and like retreats that are focused on military couples. There are just a lot of um, additional challenges to accessing quality marriage counseling services for
Yeah.
military couples. So that is sort of like something that I'm really passionate about, is doing these sort of EFT based workshops and retreats for military couples. So
Mm.
yeah.
And they can find out basically by going to elizabethpolinsky.com. That's where the website they need
Um,
to go to.
the count for counseling, it's elizabethlinskycounseling.com. For the
Okay.
podcast, it's communicateandconnectpodcast.com.
Okay, great. And I have all the links in the description that follows this episode here today. And make sure everybody connect with you. And so they can follow you there. Are you in the social media platforms that they could also follow
Yes.
you?
Yeah. At Liz Polinsky. So Facebook and Instagram at Liz Polinsky.
And
Yeah.
Polinsky is spelled Polinsky, right?
Yes.
So we'll be having, of course, all those links inside the show notes. So, Elizabeth, I want to say thank you. But before we wrap things up here, last question: is there anything that maybe I didn't ask you, maybe you might want to leave us with, that would be helpful for a person listening today? And I think about that wife. I call her the extraordinary wife, because she has such influence and, to me, power that can really help a marriage. And so, if you're to give one
Mhm.
last word to him or her, what might you say to her, what she can continue to do to make her marriage happier? Of course, it's not that she's going to find her happiness per se only in her marriage. She needs to be responsible for that herself. But is there anything she possibly could think about that would help her marriage even become happier, knowing she's that extraordinary wife?
Yes. Yeah. So like oftentimes when I think about if I could only give one thing to couples,
Yeah.
what would I give them? And I would tell them to do a monthly marriage meeting. That is like
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
if I could only do one thing,
Mhm.
that would be the thing that I would have couples do, because it gives it a dedicated time.
Mhm.
So if we're, on date night, I don't need to necessarily hash our last fight or talk about the bills that need to get taken care of. We know there's a dedicated time to talk about those things, and it can allow us to just enjoy date night or enjoy family time or whatever is going on. It
Mhm.
also makes sure that there is dedicated time to talk about things that would normally get swept under the rug.
Mhm.
So talking about how is our quality time going? How's our sex life going? How's our money situation? Are we are we okay? Are we happy with how the distribution of chores are going? Are there things we need to talk about in terms of parenting, discipline, or there's a dedicated time to talk about those things.
I love it. I love it. I call it like the huddle time. So I really love that
Yeah.
idea because really they can download there and save their like I say their date night for some fun things or other things like that. So I really appreciate that. Great advice. So thank you for sharing that with us. And so Elizabeth, I want to say, and I know that you're still on mending because you were sick for a while. So
Yes.
I really appreciate you taking the time to be with
Thank
us
you.
today and sharing some great value. And thank you for being here. And so with the community here at Happier Marriage Secrets community, so thank you for helping us navigate this idea of marriage and to have happier marriage. So I want to say thanks for all that you do and feel better soon.
Yeah, thanks.